Belle, does she actually suffer from the famous Stockholm Syndrome? You know, that idea where the victim ends up falling in love with their own captor. A lot of people look at Belle and the Beast and instantly go, yep, that's exactly what this is, no debate. But hold on, is it really that simple, or are we just repeating an interpretation without thinking too deeply about it? To really understand this, we need to go back to where this so-called syndrome came from. The name came from a real-life case, a bank robbery that happened in Stockholm, Sweden, where a criminal held people hostage for 6 days. And up to that point, it sounds like just another crime, except what happened afterward was completely out of the ordinary. As time passed, the hostages started getting attached to the kidnapper, and not just sympathetic toward him either. They genuinely defended the guy. One of them even stood in front of him to stop the police from shooting. And the weirdest part of all, nobody forced them to do it. When the criminal was finally arrested, things got even more surreal. Some of the hostages actually went to visit him in prison and said he hadn't been violent, that he never yelled or hurt anyone, and because of that, they felt safe with him. But to the police and the specialists, none of that made any sense. That's when the explanation came up: a psychological defense mechanism. Basically, the victim's brain tries to soften the image of the aggressor in order to cope with extreme fear and increase the chances of survival. And now comes the most interesting part. Is that what happens with Belle, or are people forcing this theory onto a story that's actually way more complex than it looks? And that's where a lot of people start looking at Beauty and the Beast in a completely different way, because to them, the relationship between the two is far from romantic and feels much more problematic, even abusive. Belle doesn't choose to be there. She basically trades her own freedom for her father and ends up trapped inside the castle, and that alone completely changes the way we view everything that comes afterward. Within that context, the idea appears that her feelings aren't exactly love, but rather her mind trying to cope with the situation she was forced into. Because for a huge part of the story, the Beast is anything but gentle or understanding. He's aggressive, impatient, and clearly difficult to live with. That becomes obvious right at the beginning, when Belle's father enters the castle without even knowing where he is, and the Beast's reaction isn't empathy. He simply throws the man into the dungeon. And even when Belle shows up begging him to free her father, he only agrees under one condition: she takes his place. So right from the start, there's already a forced exchange happening there. Another important point is that once he notices Belle, he immediately connects her to his own curse. So his decision isn't purely based on compassion, there's personal interest behind it. He keeps her in the castle even while seeing that she's terrified, far away from her father, and completely removed from her normal life. The relationship starts off totally unbalanced, and that continues when she refuses to have dinner with him, and he reacts explosively, showing that he doesn't know how to deal with frustration. But little by little, his behavior starts to change. He saves her from the wolves, begins trying to get closer to her, and gives her something that's incredibly important to Belle: a massive library filled with books. And this is where a lot of people bring in the Stockholm Syndrome theory, because gestures like these can make her mind start reinterpreting everything that's happening. The Beast stops being seen only as the person who imprisoned her and starts being viewed as someone misunderstood, someone who acts that way because of the curse, because of the years of isolation, and not necessarily out of pure cruelty. Because of that, his negative actions start getting softened in her mind, and her feelings begin to build around this new perception, almost like an emotional adaptation to the situation she's living in. That's why so many people end up concluding that this relationship isn't really a love story at all, but rather the result of a very specific psychological context. And honestly, it's kind of obvious why that interpretation became so popular, because a lot of people reduced the story down to one single point: Belle being the Beast's prisoner and still managing to see goodness in him, even while he's rude, bitter, and difficult almost the entire time. But anyone who actually watched the movie closely knows the situation isn't nearly that shallow. Yes, the Beast is aggressive at first, there's no denying that, and it's also understandable to assume he keeps Belle there because of his curse, hoping she might be the person capable of breaking it. But reducing him only to that completely ignores another side of the character that the movie shows over and over again. He also has kindness in him. And the easiest comparison to notice that is Gaston. Because if we're going to force the Stockholm Syndrome logic onto everything, then it would honestly be easier to say that those three girls constantly chasing Gaston are trapped in the idea of him, seeing him as perfect, even though he's arrogant, shallow, and completely uninterested in anything besides himself. And the ironic part is that the Beast, the one many people label as the monster in the relationship, ends up being the exact opposite of Gaston in many moments. The Beast has a short temper and explodes easily, but his actions genuinely begin to change. When Belle runs away from the castle, for example, he goes after her, but not to drag her back. He goes to save her from the wolves, and he literally gets injured protecting her. That's the moment Belle starts seeing something different in him, not as an illusion, but as a real change. The two begin connecting through things they they genuinely have in common, especially books. While Gaston treats Belle reading as something negative, almost like women shouldn't think too much, the Beast does the complete opposite and gives her an enormous library. And not only that, she starts reading to him, and that's where a real bond begins to form. Not based on fear, but on coexistence and discovery. And when feelings finally start appearing, comes the part that a lot of people completely ignore. The Beast lets her go. He doesn't trap her, manipulate her, or stop her. Even knowing she might be his last chance to break the curse, even with the rose about to lose its final petal, he chooses to let Belle leave so she can save her father. He even gives her the magic mirror to help her. That completely breaks the whole idea of control. Because if this really were a relationship based on domination, that would be the exact moment where he would never let her leave. So in the end, saying this is Stockholm Syndrome ends up oversimplifying a relationship that the movie itself builds as a transformation on both sides. It's not just Belle adapting, the Beast changes too. And honestly, it's really hard to imagine Disney building an entire story around a fake love sustained purely by a psychological defense mechanism, especially in one of their most iconic romances. I really like this kind of discussion because it shows how the same movie can generate completely different interpretations, some of them honestly pretty extreme. And this one is definitely one of the darkest theories people have ever placed on top of a Disney animation. But at the same time, that's exactly what makes it interesting. But personally, looking at the full story, it doesn't make sense to me to say Belle suffers from this syndrome. To me, it's still a romantic story with character development on both sides and a relationship that slowly grows over time, not something built on illusion or fear. If you enjoyed this kind of analysis and want more videos like this, make sure to leave a like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones, because there are still a ton of interesting theories and discussions coming up.